Measurement isn't always about having like a perfect scorecard. It's about asking better questions, right? Like, what does success look like for our users? What's the smallest, clearest sign that we're on the right track? Just start there. And I think this outcome, driven measurement helps you do that because it gives you something to anchor to and it helps your team focus like less on the noise and more on the signal.
Hey, it's Ben. Welcome to Awkward Silences. On this episode, we're talking to Lyndsi Lee, the Senior Manager of UX Research at Turnitin. And our topic is measurement. Measuring user experiences, whether or not we should use something like NPS or Net Promoter Score, CSAT, customer satisfaction. Lyndsi is a great person to take us through this because her career started in educational assessment. And through a circuitous path that involved a stop along the way at a remote interior design company, more on that in a second, she landed at Turnitin where she's combining her interest in design, assessment, and as of late, UX research. And so it's a great pod if you're someone who is struggling maybe with trying to get your stakeholders to think more broadly about how to measure experience. Maybe they're really focused on and maybe obsessed with something like NPS or CSAT. She has this framework that she takes us through, which is called outcome-based assessment. It lets you tailor your research to a product suite, regardless of your industry, vertical, or whatever it is you're working on. So it's really useful. I think you'll leave with something that hopefully you can put into practice next week. So here's my conversation with Lyndsi Lee. Enjoy. Lyndsi, welcome to Awkward Silences.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
Yes, very excited to talk with you about measurement, impact, ROI, all things that are very important to not just researchers, but the companies that they work for. Before we jump into that, NPS, CSAT, and all the rest, tell us a little bit about your path to Turnitin, because you didn't start in a quote unquote research job. What was your role before you transitioned to what you might call your research career now?
Yeah. Yeah. So buckle up for this one because it's a winding one. So I come from like a big family of educators, but for the longest time I was convinced that I would not follow that path. So when I was in college, my mom encouraged me like several times and not subtly like to go into education and I was like no way, it's not for me.
Okay.
Great for you, not for me. And I got my bachelor's in psychology and I thought that I might go like the clinical route, but eventually, I don't know. I just started veering in a direction and I got my master's in school counseling, got a specialist degree, and then I became certified as a school psychological examiner. So, after declaring that I would not go into education, I spent 10 years in public education,
As one does.
as one does, exactly. So I supported students, on the counseling side. And then I was able to support educators through these educational evaluations. So when a teacher had concerns about like a student's learning, we'd work together to create a plan. And sometimes that plan like included individual testing. And so I was the one who carried out those evaluations. And that experience, it really gave me like a front row seat to how instructors and educators make decisions and the information that they need to like do their job, as well as how deeply they care about just doing right by their students. They truly care about these
Mm-hmm.
students.
Mm-hmm.
And so 10 years later, eventually I started to just kind of crave something more creative. I'm a creative person, I always have been, and I needed something more creative. And so I've always loved interior design. And so I took courses, got certified, and started designing rooms like remotely for this online interior design company. So much fun. Yeah, it was great. And it was a lot of fun. I got to do a lot of things with them. And so, but this company was considered tech, because they're
Uh-huh.
online, right?
Sure. Sure.
And so it really opened my eyes to some new possibilities. And again, it was a lot of fun, but I started thinking like, well, what's this and what's this? And so that's where I first discovered UX design. And I had this kind of like epiphany that UX is like where psychology and technology meet. And those are two things that I'm actually, really good at and have experience in. And so dove deep into that, got another certification. I'm all
Okay.
about some certifications.
Yeah.
Worked on, some real products and consulted on some independent projects to build experience. And then when the opportunity came at Turnitin, it just felt kind of like the perfect fit because it combined everything that I had done up to that point, which was, psychology, technology, education, actually, even design, because it was for a designer role, And so I realized I could, at that point, like circle back to, my roots and continue kind of supporting educators, but doing it at a much broader scale now and helping them, by building tools that just help them do their work better. And so, anyway, if there's one thing I've learned kind of along the way, it's that paths into UX research just are not linear. Mine certainly wasn't linear.
Sure.
But I've heard, many like interviewing people, now as a manager, they talk about their path into UX research. And it's just they're all winding. And that's, I think, what really makes this work so kind of rich and meaningful, that we all have we bring different experiences to the table. And I
Hmm.
think that's really cool.
Yeah. And I can already hear and recognize why you're doing so well there at Turnitin. Your background in evaluation and testing probably got you to sharpen your ability to take create instruments and assess whether or not something is real or needs to be, gone after. And then your pivot to interior design and design more generally had you think about, the orientation and relationship to things. Are those skills, I guess, what skills do you find that you carried with you across these roles and that you rely on even today in your work, whether or not it's for Turnitin or otherwise? But like, we'll talk about how your approach and thoughts around assessment with NPS and CSAT, but what are some of the other things that you've taken with you no matter, and that you think will carry on no matter what role you go to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think honestly, I've taken things with me from each experience. And I like the fact that I kind of have this like diverse experience. So the education piece, obviously, like the experience in education and knowing how the education system works,
Hmm.
inside and out. But then going to interior design and had to work more creatively there. And I don't even just mean like design wise, like just there were a lot of solutions that I had to come up with that had to be very creative, whether it be, like with budget or with small spaces or, I had to think outside the box to really like to get to a solution. And I think that helped me obviously to work in research and design. And so I think the balance of like creative and analytical skills have helped me kind of come together to this role.
Hmm. And what value did you find in certifications? Because I know a lot of our audience are folks who are either earlier in their career and they're wondering if that might be a good fit for them, or they're maybe folks like you who are transitioning from a different kind of industry. What value did you find in the certifications? How did that help you along your path?
Yeah, that's another good question. So I know that there's a lot of talk and conversation around like certifications and boot camps and should they not? And what I personally got out of the certification was not I didn't think about it like a checkbox.
Okay.
Like I'm gonna put this on my resume and say that I have this certification. I didn't think about it like that. I wanted to like immerse myself and learn from these courses, and I did. I learned a lot from the courses that I didn't really know before because I had not worked in UX before. And so anything that it could teach me about UX and about like, how um how it works was beneficial and valuable to me. But I'll also say that I did one other thing that was beyond the certification and found this kind of immersive. It wasn't a course; it was like a project,
Okay.
and that's where we worked. I worked with a PM, I worked with an engineer, and I really kind of worked on real products and real projects, because the one thing that the certifications in the boot camps can't give you is those real world experiences and the constraints. So yeah, and I see that like whenever if I'm interviewing somebody or something like that, if um they bring projects, if they're fresh out of, boot camp or something, it's very formulaic, the design, the whole process. But if you have the opportunity to put yourself into a project, a real world project, then I would say absolutely do that, because that was the most valuable thing that I could have done for myself.
Yeah, I imagine, that being able to speak to how you reacted to constraints, how you reacted to things like timeline and budget, those are things that we often as practitioners, we feel constrained. We don't want to have our research timelines shortened or our design resources cut, but that's the nature of many businesses. The unlimited budgets; those are not going anywhere. So I expect that's why you're so efficient as a leader and impactful as a practitioner, because you are able to deploy rigor, as we'll talk about in a second, where it's able. But that, like, well, I can't have it everywhere. And is that advice that you would give to someone who's maybe job searching now? They might have a passion for, user experience design or quantitative research, and then they might have this more niche, a passion of theirs, but they might be going after roles that are more broad. Did that help you, or what advice would you give someone who's interviewing now and has this passion, but might be, applying for a role that's a little different than it?
Yeah, I would just say, like, don't box yourself into thinking that there's only one way to use your passion. So, like sometimes the connection between like what you love to do and the work that you do isn't obvious like right away. And that's okay. Just I would say like stay open to exploring from different angles. Even if they feel a little unexpected. And obviously, I'm pulling from my experience here. And again, my experience is all over the place. But, for me, it wasn't a straight line. And I approached my career from a few different angles before I pulled all those pieces together. And again, every experience taught me something valuable, even if it didn't seem like, quote, on track at the time, because I could tell you, like, oh, I had it all mapped out. Like, I would be a liar if I told you that. I didn't have it mapped out. I thought I did at the time. I thought that I had these things mapped out, but then I stayed open. And I would, again, the advice I would give is like, trust that the skills and the instincts that you're building now will show up later in ways that you might not expect. And even taking small steps to explore those new interests or invest in learning when something sparks your curiosity. I'm all about the curiosity, and I'm sure a lot of us are, in this profession, obviously. But give yourself like permission to evolve. Your career doesn't have to look like anybody else's blueprint. You don't have to go, one, two, three, four. It's okay to build as you go. And so I guess that would be my experience.
I appreciate
That
that.
would be my
I think
advice.
that that's really it's accessible for someone to reflect on what it is they like about the work they're currently doing and maybe the gaps in what they're getting. I love your story about how you, through a remote interior design company, found out about tech broadly defined, of going from in a school environment, counseling and advising educators and students, to now at Turnitin. And so let's turn, pun intended there, to Turnitin, where you got exposed to a different kind of a part of research, which is, I don't know, what would you even call these? The NPS and the CSAT. These are like the ways we measure experience, measure impact. How do you let's start there at the high level. When you say NPS and CSAT, what are these things? How would you define those as a
Oh my gosh.
category?
I have such a visceral reaction, and I shouldn't. I shouldn't, but I do. So I don't know if you should ask me what to call these things like on air, because I'll probably have like bad words or something. No, just kidding. So I do have kind of a complicated opinion on CSAT and NPS. And it might not be that complicated, actually. We might all have this opinion, and maybe all of our opinions are complicated.
Yeah, so we
But
just need to voice them. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But, I've had to report on these in the past, as many of us probably have had to report on, these type of metrics. And I do think that they can be useful in certain contexts. I think that they can tell you, that something is happening, but they don't tell you like why users feel the way they do or what you should actually do about it. And I think, honestly, in my experience, I've seen teams end up just reaching for these metrics because they know they should measure something after a product ships, but they're not always sure like what to measure. They're not experts in psychometrics or
Mm.
quantum metrology. Is that a word? I don't know if that's a
It is
thing,
now.
but
It is now. Yes. Yeah.
so these broad scores kind of become the default. And that's fine to a point, but especially like in the more complex products, I think those scores can hide a lot of like real pain points. And also you might have like a decent NPS score because you've got brand trust, or you've had users for a really long time, or you just don't have a they don't have a better option, but that doesn't mean like the day-to-day experience is actually good. And let me get off on this tangent for 1 second. So I'm sure we've all had this experience, but I have seen NPS questions in the most absurd of places, like, okay, so like I'm, looking at my medical records online, and it's like, would I
Yes, I just got a
would I
blood test. I
refer?
don't know if I would. And NPS, for those who are newer, is Net Promoter Score. It's often, Lindsay,
Right.
0 to 10, right? How likely would you be to recommend this product service to a friend? Yeah, and
To
it
a
does show
friend.
up. Yeah, it does show
Yeah.
up in a bunch of different weird places.
It does. So how likely would I be to, recommend my medical evaluation app or records app to a friend? Like, am I gonna go to wine night with my girlfriends and be like, you guys
Guess
have to
what?
look at
Yes.
this
Oh my
app
gosh.
that my
This
doctor.
dashboard to
Yes,
track my, yeah, whatever. Yeah.
amazing. No, I'm not gonna do that. Some people might, and I'm not
Sure.
judging that.
Nope.
Like,
Nope.
I'm not judging what goes on at wine night. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Right.
Like, but my friends and I have other things to talk about. We're not gonna talk about that. But so that's my small tangent with that piece of it. But I also, then you've also got like analytics, and I'm not knocking analytics. They have a very, they've got a place in research for sure. And they can also tell you like what users are doing or not doing, or why they're, but they can't tell you why they're not doing it or doing it. Right. So analytics, when I say analytics, I mean obviously like engagement scores. That's a popular one that a lot of people like to fall back to, is engagement. And so if you're just looking at these NPS or CSAT, which is, how satisfied are you with the product, you end up just with this kind of big fuzzy picture,
Mm-hmm.
and like, maybe something's off without really a clear idea of how to fix it. And you just have this kind of arbitrary maybe target to say like, we want our NPS score to be, 56. And then why do you want it to be 56? Like, and what are you going to do about it if it's not 56? So that's kind of, oof.
Yeah, and I think it's popular because it's maybe simple to a fault at times, and in our day and age, I'm sure you've seen this in our user experience community more broadly. We are regularly being asked to justify our impact and designate our ROI, and so I get it why teams who might be reporting to product stakeholders, engineering stakeholders, or like marketing or sales folks, the sort of front of the house teams, I understand why they gravitate toward that. But you alluded to it that a lot of our work doesn't neatly roll up. I mean, if your work doing are like a classic usability study and you are improving the onboarding flow, then yes, maybe a CSAT score will rise. But what are the approaches that we ought to add to that? I don't think you're suggesting that we do away with these things. They have
No.
a value. But what might we as researchers or experienced professionals start thinking about adding to these other scores that can help us get a more holistic picture that maybe our stakeholders and the wider business might sort of get along with?
Yeah, I'm definitely not advocating for just like doing away completely. And I've seen these provocative statements before, like do away with NPS or do away with CSAT, and it's like, no, okay, let's take a step back and look at all of this together, and we can all live in harmony here. So I think honestly, just instead of just like measuring general satisfaction, right, or looking at behavior just in this vacuum, we can start asking ourselves, like, what if we got really specific about the outcomes that users need? So there's this framework that I've used in my work that's been really effective for this, and it helps break the experience down into these atomic pieces. And so what they are like small foundational outcomes that users might not even articulate out loud, but they maybe quietly like make or break how the experience feels. And so I do want to be clear on something though. I did not like invent this framework. I want to give credit where it's due. It came out of Amazon Prime Video's work on customer experience outcomes.
Okay.
But what's really great about it is that it can be adapted to any product, any org. It doesn't have to follow again XYZ formula. You can take it and do what you need to do with it. And I think that's why I really like it. But the big idea here is that like you're not just tracking feelings or behaviors, but you're getting down to whether you're helping your users succeed in ways that matter to them.
It sounds a little bit like a job to be done, but I guess so. Let's dig into this the atomic outcome. Can you give us some examples or questions that someone might be asking or could ask themselves to kind of get to these outcomes? Let's take a digital or a software experience as our example here.
Right.
What would be an example of one, and what are some questions that we could use to get to them?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that jobs to be done. It's very jobs to be done-ish. It's
Okay.
not like reinventing every single wheel here. It's taking frameworks that we already know and that we've practiced before and just bringing them in. And so also, so you can start by just like pulling everything in that you already know, which would be like past research, user interviews, feedback, support conversations, anything you've got, just pull it in. And then you look at the deeper needs behind them. So like the jobs to be done. And so from there, you get your team together. Obviously you can do this remotely, do it in Miro or whatever your
Hmm.
whiteboard is, and draft outcomes based on what users are trying to accomplish. And so you have to make sure that these are not the features that they use, but what they actually want to like achieve or feel, right? So, and it helps to like organize them, by product or journey stage, and definitely keep them feature agnostic because, okay, so example. So instead of saying users can bulk upload files, which is feature, specific, you could say something like users can complete repetitive tasks without friction.
Ah, and
So
that could apply to multiple parts of your experience depending
exactly.
on, I see. Okay. And
You could
mobile and
pull it from
desktop, it could
multiple.
go all over the place. Okay, I see.
Yep. These are like modular almost.
Hmm.
You can move
Yeah.
these things around, but the phrasing, it just keeps the focus on the experience, and the product can evolve, and the features can evolve, and the need is still the same, right? And so your team just will continue to do that until you feel like you've documented all the important outcomes. Um, I found that like after you do this with your team, like let it simmer for a few days, and come back to it, because then you might realize like, oh, these two can be combined into this one, or this phrasing feels off, just like with any documentation. Um, but so that's kind of the first phase of this.
And shout out to the CS and support folks out there. They have always been such a great resource for, if you're joining an organization, you're trying to figure out the lay of the land, what has already been done, or certainly if you're a user researcher trying to figure out what's the most painful thing that maybe your product or engineer or design stakeholders don't know about. Talk to your success or support folks. Do a little ride along digitally or in person. They are the tip of the spear. Okay, so Lyndsi,
I
I have
agree.
a follow-up question. So it sounds like at the end of a couple of these exercises, you might have a very busy whiteboard with a bunch of different potential, I guess depending on how broad your experience is. How do you prioritize how do you kind of get to the thing you really want to start? Because I think that's what that's one of the attractions and downsides of something like NPS is it tries to be a catch-all, but it can't. So how do you and your team, or how have you in your work thought about prioritizing those atomic outcomes?
A great question. And yes, circling back to the support folks, they are kind of the unsung heroes sometimes, for and the untapped resources, I think, for research teams a lot of times as well, that we don't think about going to them. So, but yes, so you're going to want to like stress test these outcomes. And ideally, this would be done with users. But, we work with what we've got. And for example, support or CSMs or, um, customer facing folks.
Hmm.
But if you are working with real users, it could be through interviews or surveys or even like just simple cognitive testing. You would ask things like, does this goal make sense to you? Would you describe it in this way? How important is it compared to other things you're trying to do? You would come up with a question framework on how to uh, get these outcomes. This is leading to the prioritization, but it's making sure you're capturing like what matters and not just like what sounds nice in a workshop,
Yeah.
you know because we can tend to do that
Of course.
sometimes.
Oh, of
We can
course.
get caught up
Yeah.
in
Yeah. I
ourselves,
think that's why so much of us like personas or have liked personas is we get to use a cool name and we might be able to partner with a designer and come up with an avatar. And then, well, we check back in a few quarters and that, Sally the shopper or Jimmy the, I don't know, the bargain hunter doesn't quite stick in the same way, but we really liked it. It really sounded good. It has, I know I'm a sucker for branding too. And sometimes it can get in the way of the real research outcome or the real ability to improve for our customers. So I appreciate that caveat.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to keep yourself grounded all the time. I do love a good looking persona as well,
Definitely. Oh yeah.
but so obviously not every outcome is critical.
Hmm.
If everything's important, then nothing's important,
Hmm.
right? And so narrowing the list to like 10 to 12 top outcomes keeps it focused and manageable and sets you up like for measuring them in a meaningful way. And so that's how you kind of narrow them down is take them through with users and asking them honestly, I've seen card sorting done here where it's like here's like most important, here is like yeah, and here is like least important. And so put the outcomes in and so that the users could then like sort the outcomes in the columns and
Yeah.
then that's how you can come up with those 10 to 12.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's a really good activity for that one. So
And I would like to do that with my product stakeholders. Sometimes product managers get very narrow in what they're working on, but how do you get buy-in or communicate these with stakeholders? Are those stakeholders part of this process at any point? Because I know that's another thing that some researchers and experienced pros face is that they internally, among the research folks or UX folks, get alignment and then they take it out sort of in the wilder organization and they face some pushback either because they haven't done education around it or they're not aligned on roadmaps. How would you advise folks in their practices to make sure that their partners and stakeholders are along for the ride with the atomic outcomes?
I would actually encourage everybody to get strategic about this. So find the product person that's like the most not agreeable necessarily, but like that will be open-minded to work with, and then take them through the whole process. Don't hand over anything.
Oh,
Like
that's a great call. Yeah.
yeah, they need to be there from the beginning. You start with if you have a big product suite, then start with one product, start with one experience, start with one PM, and then take them through it, build it together, and then when it starts to work and everybody starts to see like, oh, that's how we can, measure our experiences, it catches on. It really does. And so because it's hard to measure experiences for product people, for, UX people, for everybody. So if they see like, okay, there's a way to measure, then it catches on. So that would be my advice is to to find the most open-minded product manager first, and
Yeah, I
then
don't think there's anything wrong with trying to identify a champion and leveraging that
no.
person, because what I'm hoping would happen in this example is that that person's product suite or their what they're working on would get better faster than those or more measurably than those who aren't working with the research team. And so that leads me to a follow-up question. When you've done this in the past or when you've seen this work for other teams, does that help in the kinds of things you're reporting? Sometimes researchers are like, okay, I found this thing, but how do I make it stick with the stakeholders? It sounds like if you've got an agreed upon outcome, you can say, and here's how it will impact and affect this outcome. Is that how you are thinking about using these identifiable outcomes as they kind of show up in the deliverables and the ways that you put your findings to work?
Yeah, I mean, it even shows up in, like, the way that, designers design, like, because if they are working on something for this product and it's like, okay, well, which outcome does it map to? And if it doesn't map to an outcome, like, is this important? Like, maybe
Yeah.
we need to reevaluate this. And sometimes, yes, it is. And we need to add an outcome to the dashboard, but sometimes maybe it's not. And so I think that that's one way that it helps. But when it really helps is when we start measuring these outcomes, because you know at this point we've just identified the outcomes, but which is it's fine. If we want to stop there, we can stop there, but measuring those outcomes is, I think, really kind of what gets everybody on board. And I think, there's really practical ways to do it. You could do it a whole lot of different ways.
Yeah, what are some of the ways that you've found it successful? Is it like a monthly survey with users? Is it a in-app pop-up? How might you, after you identify some outcomes, kind of vet them with your stakeholders? How do you start putting them to work and putting them in front of your customers or users, wherever they may be?
Yeah, I mean, once you get sophisticated with it, you could use a mix of methods and add all of it to a score. But I'll not go there yet. I'll just say that I think I have found that the survey method works well, like a pop up, yes, but it could be like a pop up to an external survey if it's a little longer. Because if you've got this one product and you've got like 10 or 12 outcomes that you want to measure, it might need to be, an external survey somewhere else. You could just even something as simple as like, how easy or difficult is it to XYZ? And then just have a consistent scale for every question so that the comparison will be easy. And then make sure you've got your sample size big enough that you can trust the signal, obviously. But what's important though is that you measure each outcome individually rather than kind of collapsing them into
Ah,
one
okay.
big
That's really
score.
important. Okay. And
Yeah,
why do you do that?
because then you know exactly where you're at, like in the experience, what is going on, and where things are maybe going sideways a little bit. But you can adapt this any way that you want for your org, but one way that I like is like the traffic light system. So just like the red, yellow, green, you don't have to have these complex scores, associated to each outcome. They could just be red, yellow, green when they get to the product, or when they get to the stakeholders. They're just get red, yellow, green. Behind the scenes, we know, what the scores are and all of
Hmm.
that and what went into it. But green, you're meeting the outcome, which is a strength area. Yellow is, mixed or inconsistent, which is an opportunity area. And then red means you're falling short and the users are feeling it, which is a growth area. And so I think the power of this approach is that you're not just saying, like, we need to improve the NPS, which that's vague and disconnected, but you're saying, like, this specific part of the experience is breaking down. Let's fix that. And that's really powerful, I think, because you can all rally around that and actually take action, and it's specific enough to like guide real decisions and not just be like, well, let's raise the NPS. Like,
Yeah. It
you
ends
know,
up, you said this when we were preparing for the conversation, that one of the benefits of the outcome approach is that it provides a lot of clarity. And I think what it also does, in addition to that, is it sort of turns down the temperature on the politics that can sometimes happen in product development. You might have that one, and I'm not trying to throw shade on any PM, but like there's usually that, not but, period. There's usually that one PM that's been there for a minute, and their product often will get a little more love or get priority on the roadmap or get sooner. And so this way, it democratizes and levels the playing field. What are some other the benefits? The team gets clarity on what's working and what's not. What else have you seen, both from the research, the design side, as well as the stakeholder side, when a team or a company or a product group shifts to this more outcome approach way of looking at the experience?
yeah, I think that what I really like is that you kind of stop chasing these like hand wavy goals, like make it easier to use, like come on, what does that mean? Like what make what easier to use? Which part? Like where? And you start kind of focusing on like the why behind the design. And then I also really like that it helps with prioritization because if you've got two ideas on the table, which we often do,
Sure.
right? You can ask like which one helps us improve more outcomes, or which one will help us move like a red to a green. I think that's just a much more productive conversation than to say like which one feels more important.
Oh my gosh, yes. That feel. And it's important when we're doing user statements because that empathy is important if we're not. But the feel when you're trying to do product prioritization, who's going to
It's so
win?
subjective,
How do you
right?
exactly? How do you determine between two? I feel like this is important. Well, I feel like this is important. Well, then what do you do? And as the researcher, you're caught between multiple stakeholders who you both want to please. Yeah, that's such a great call out.
Yeah. So you can just point to it and say, like, well, this is why, this is what, and this is why, and this is where we should go. It's very, it's directional and it's actionable.
Yeah, I love that. This is what, and this is why. And so would that be one of the pieces of advice that you have for teams who might be, or ICs who are listening to this, and maybe they're at a startup or a smaller company, or maybe we'll say less mature user experience or design focused company, and they want to start measuring, maybe they've heard from their executives or their managers, like, how do we know this is working? How do we know your work, what you're spending your time doing is making an impact? Is that the kind of advice? Is that what you wish more teams would start doing, especially around measurement? I think we get kind of obsessed with quantifying, like you said, but we use these fuzzy inputs like, do the users like it? Does it feel better?
Yeah, I think that especially like with the smaller teams and the lower resource teams, like just start small. Like start with a few outcomes that your team feels like are important to users, and then go vet them with the users, obviously. So that it's not just like a feel thing. And then once those are vetted, then that's that start measuring just a few of them. And I think the other advice I have is like it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be meaningful, right?
Hmm.
So I think teams a lot of times just get stuck in trying to find either like the perfect metric or like the mix of perfect metrics. And when they can't, they just default back to the easiest one, which is like NPS CSAT. And it's not, it's just because it's difficult to try to find those perfect metrics, and you're never going to find the perfect thing. But measurement isn't always about having like a perfect scorecard. It's about asking better questions, right? And so, like, what does success look like for our users? What's the smallest, clearest sign that we're on the right track? Just start there. And I think this outcome, driven measurement helps you do that because it gives you something to anchor to. And it
I love
helps
that.
your team focus like less on the noise and more on the signal.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of love about this framework.
Absolutely. And it makes me it reminds me of something that I'm hearing more teams do, and that is create sort of customer advisory boards or internal panels. Not I mean, certainly, you can create a large panel if maybe you have a difficult to reach population. But if you're thinking as you're listening to Lyndsi, like, well, how do I like talk to users quickly? Like, well, that's what a customer advisory board could do. If you have 20 to 25 folks who represent sort of your core user group or segment, and maybe they're in that champion or evangelist, they'll tell you if something isn't working. They'll tell you if an outcome statement doesn't resonate. And so, you send them a quick pulse, share with them a survey, grab, 10 or 15 minutes. Is that, Lyndsi, how you often think about this? It sounds sounds like it's scrappier. It doesn't have to be, like you said, perfect and perfectly laid out and take a long time.
I've done like both before. I've had customer advisory boards where, we like met once a month, or you could just send them a quick email,
Yeah.
like you said, get the pulse on something, um, while simultaneously talking to users in user interviews. Like if you can have a couple different methods going on, that's obviously great. But again, if you need to just get scrappy, get scrappy. Like you work with what you've got. And if that is, just talking to like 10 users over here, or if it's having this customer advisory board, um, just start.
Yeah.
Just start. That's really the advice that I would
I
have.
appreciate that. I wanted to ask two follow-ups. One, how often do you typically, or would you recommend that folks revise or revisit the outcome statements? Like, is there a good moment when you would recommend a team checking back in, like a roadmap revisit, or at the end of the year? When have you found that revisiting the outcome statements makes sense? Because you don't want to be doing it too often, such that you lose momentum and you don't build enough information. So when have you found that it works to revisit those?
Yeah, I mean, you could do it every 6 months. You could even do it honestly every 12 months, but uh, that it comes with a caveat of also, if you are working on outcomes, like if you've got 3 red, let's say, and you're working on those and you push out, a quote fix for those, like a new release, you might want to rerun it after the release has been out for a few weeks or something. So I would say maybe once every 6 months, or if you've got changes that you want to measure those changes. So
I appreciate that. That's really useful. And then the second question kind of speaks to what we started at the start of our conversation. Speaks to the start. When we started our conversation, you talked about how you began as maybe considering clinical psych, and you got involved in counseling in school. You have this through line from my POV of like a good, sharp understanding of quantitative value and assessment. And I think for some, not all user researchers, that's sort of the like, oh gosh, I'm a
yeah,
numbers afraid person. And
yeah,
AI and large language models and workflows and all the things that have been battering us left and right. A lot of it is quantitatively oriented. Maybe we're partnering with data science, or we have a quant person we're working with. Is there, a skill that you think today's user experience professional really should learn from the more quantitative assessment side, or something that they often misunderstand about doing this sort of more quantitative assessment work? Because it's clearly helped you in your work and your career. But for someone who's listening to this and is has a little number fear to them, what advice might you give for them to kind of get over that and yeah, put it into practice?
that's funny. If you would have asked me this like a few years ago, I would have said like take take a course in R, just to get familiar with it. But I don't know that I would even say that now. And I'm sitting over here looking for so I have this book that honestly, yes, I have um actually I've got a couple of books, but I have this background in psychometrics and all of this, and still I refer to books. Like I look at them all the time.
Hmm.
And one of our product people is like, oh, she's got her book out. So it's, yeah, anyway, but point being, I would have said take a course in R. And still, if you want to take a course in R just to become familiar with it, I think that would be great. But like you said, AI is, been battering us. Like we all, not just people who are kind of scared of numbers. I think we all need to learn how AI can help us quantitative metrics going forward. I think that is kind of the way forward. And we hear about, AI all over the place. All of us, just it's everywhere, right? But I think it's really kind of the future. And so, and it's supposed to help us do things more efficiently. And why can't it help us do, quantitative research more efficiently, or at least help us understand the numbers more efficiently, right? So that's where I would probably start. along with carrying your textbooks
Yes, I
around
was
like
going to
I
say
do.
I'm wanting you to bring out this encyclopedic thing. Like, well,
I
here's what
know.
I use every day, and it's this 8-inch thick thing. I hear you. I had a small amount of stats training years ago, and I found that while I might not pull the specific stats, an equation, being able to like know roughly what a standard deviation is, and being able to ask for know the difference between a mean and a median, and when to use those things. Like you can plug those into an LLM, and as long as you can have that baseline, you'll be able to interpret it. That's what so many of the AI adjacent researchers are saying, like, vet the tech, trust the tech, but also verify. And so if you have that foundation, you can know what you're looking for. Because if you don't know what you're looking for, then, you might deliver something that might end up hurting or harming an experience down the line.
Yeah, sample size too is a big one. Right now, I'm lucky to have a very good quant person on my team that like anytime I want to know anything about I'm like sample size.
Yeah,
What is that a good sample size? Is that
right.
a like
Yes.
and so even if you don't have a quant person on your team, you can still, like you said, go vet, but verify, but go to AI and figure out like what your sample size should be. Understand what a standard deviation is. Uh, you know, a like a just even just a basic like LinkedIn Learning or something, or any of those courses, like a basic stat like intro, I think would be good. And then go to AI. And like you said, as long as you know what you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah, it'll help you reinforce or figure out. Yeah, it's kind of your teaching assistant or your
Mhm.
your intern. Yeah, all right. A couple of other resources that you would recommend for folks that you found useful, just in general. Maybe not necessarily about measuring experiences, but just user experience, research or design resources that you like.
On the topic of quant, there is a book called Measuring the User Experience that's pretty good. So just FYI on that one. But I know that there is no way that you haven't heard this one, but I do recommend Erica Hall's book, Just Enough Research. I'm sure you've heard that plenty of times. It's just approachable and it's a little snarky, and I like that. It's just very to the point. And I think honestly, it's good for like designers or PMs or anybody like that wants to know more about research. So I love that one. And then I'll recommend a podcast as well. It's called Hidden Brain.
Yep,
And
great
so
podcast.
yeah, it's not about UX per se, right? But it's just a good reminder of like how people think and how they feel and how they make decisions. So I mean, I guess it's kind of like a psych major's dream of a podcast, right? It just helps me to like zoom out sometimes and think more deeply about like user psychology, and why people do the things that they do, and it's so central to good research.
And it makes complete sense. I mean, hindsight here, but your attraction to outcome-oriented research. I mean, so much of that I imagine is alluded to in a podcast like Hidden Brain that talks about like our underlying motivations and the goals we have. And I think that's such a great way to end, because I think that's the real beauty of the framework that you've shared with us today. Is it helps us as UX professionals. I say that if you're in product design, research, reops, it helps you pull away from your particular experience, because I think sometimes we can get sort of bogged down. Like, I work in this kind of tech and it has to have this kind of outcome. Like, well, are you dealing with people trying to do a thing in this world? Well, like, start there. And I think, Lyndsi, that's what I love about this approach. Is it helps us to sort of pull ourselves up, meet with our stakeholders, think about what we're actually trying to help people do. So get out there, everybody, and start thinking about your experience in atomic outcomes. And I think you'll see your experience get better. Lyndsi, thank you so very much.
Yeah, thank you.